Evening, Matt.
Hey Graham, nice to see you.
Good to see you. Welcome to Crazy in Love, the podcast where two therapists have a look at all things to do with modern relationships. Tonight, Matt, we're going to look at a Psychology Today blog post that we put together and you led on, focusing on the idea that long-term relationships are no fun. The title is almost deliberately provocative, isn't it? Almost deliberately enticing and a bit of a party pooper atmosphere again that we bring to the table about long-term relationships. Uh, Talk us through just the headlines of what we're trying to achieve with the blog post, and then we'll get a bit more granular in terms of the detail of what we're actually saying.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're really conflicted on this point about whether they're fun or not, aren't we? We do think they're fun. We think they're really worthwhile. We think they're more
Yeah,
than fun, I suppose, is what we're going to go on to try
yeah.
and say, aren't we?
Can
They
have
can't.
elements of fun, but it's not really about the fun, is it?
It's not really about the fun, no. But we also don't think they're drudgery, I suppose, is the other point. Because
Yeah.
if something's not fun, then it's drudgery, isn't it? Seemingly, and I don't think we think it's that. I think we think it's if it is akin to hard work, it's like sort of hard work of, I don't know, climbing something that feels valuable, or doing something, a workout or something that you feel good at the end of. Key points, I suppose, are that the cultural stories that we've got about love tend to be absolute rubbish. I can never remember whether we're allowed to swear or not, but they're absolute BS, aren't they? They're nonsense.
We can
And
swear, we'll just put an explicit rating, go for it.
um, and that they stop at the first kiss, is what we say in the article. They stop at the sprint to the airport, those sort of, say, kind of thinking of films or rom-coms or something. They never really get into
Yeah.
what the relationship is really like in the long run, and the long-term relationships just can't keep giving you that dopamine spike. They can't give you the kind of hits of in the way that an early relationship does, and in some ways it's a good thing, right? It'd drive you crazy if you felt that way the whole time. If I don't know whether we say it here or somewhere else, but you'd lose your job, wouldn't you? It's not,
Well,
that's not.
that was where I wanted us to start. It's kind of
Yeah,
almost, we say it's supposed to fade, that dopamine hit
yeah, right.
beginning, the kind of last, the
Yeah,
intensity of it. It's almost evolutionarily supposed to fade, and but for
yeah,
specific reasons. And what
yeah.
you'd lose your job? What else? What
Yeah. I mean,
you
it's
lose your
just
friends, lose
yeah,
everything.
sort of nothing lasts forever, is it? It's sort of like applause or something. If it goes on too long, it's a bit baffling, or a party that will never end, or a social occasion, or a football. Even like you and I are big watchers of football. I watch mine in the Premiership. I think you may be long for those days. But when the time is added on, sometimes it's like 10, 11 minutes now, and you're like, it's too long, right? It's just like, is this ever gonna? Am I ever gonna get out of here? I've just come back from watching Spurs this afternoon, so I've got that kind of, am I ever gonna get away from here moment. So I think there's something about that as well, isn't there? I suppose phases of a relationship. Something about growing up. It's fun being a kid. For me, I enjoyed like being little and playing out and all of those things. But I sort of wanted to grow up as well, and I enjoyed what more was available to me as I was growing up and maturing. And I think I feel like good relationships are a bit like that as well. They are fun at first. I'm glad, like I had lots of fun with my wife at first, but it's very different now. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with her hearing me say that. I don't think we would honestly describe it as fun now that often, but it's lovely and it's meaningful and it's important and it's sustaining and it's things which are, I think, in the end, maybe more important than fun.
One of the Psychology Today pushed out the blog post on their social media recently, and
Yeah.
one of the pushbacks we got a good few times in the comments underneath some of the tweets or the Facebook posts that they put out was the challenge that I'm 40 years in, I'm 20 years in, I'm 30 years into a relationship, and I still have fun with my partner. What on earth are you talking about? What do we think is going on in those relationships? Is that
Yeah.
just that people are, maybe their relationship contexts are a bit different to ours with children, etc., into the mix? But I imagine they're finding fun around the edges. They're still connecting, still having good sex, maybe pretty regularly, still going and finding a babysitter and going out quite
Yeah.
regularly, and still connecting, finding each other mysterious by having individual lives and new hobbies, new interests, whatever it might be. Do we think that's what's going on, or
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm a natural skeptic. I'd sort of
You're
I
a
wonder,
skeptic about everything.
wonder whether I really believe it. I mean, I think you can do fun things, can't you? And you can go fun places. I don't know if you're 40 years in or something, you might have even made a bit of money in the world. So, I mean, you might go on nice holidays and you might do things which are fun. I suppose if you're really zeroing in on the relationship dynamic, I would, I'd be really curious if someone was saying that to me in a session or saying that to me, in general conversation. I'd want to know what was fun and like, hats off to them if they're doing it, but it's not necessarily what I see a great deal of.
All right, let's zone in on some of those cultural stories you talked about.
What do you think about that though? Maybe before we do, I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
have you got thoughts on that? Because I think you're the one of us who more often challenges on that and says like, are we making this seem like grim or like a grind or like this is bloody hard work or it's challenge. We frame it as challenge, and I think you've often said like, where's the fun in this? It resonates with you a bit more.
Oh, not necessarily. I guess I'm conscious that we're both seeing long-term relationships through the lens of families and children and competing
Yeah,
interests and building something together, building something that's bigger than ourselves, building something that involves quite a high level of self-sacrifice. And I don't mean that in a kind of martyrish way. I mean it in a sometimes irritating way, right? I spend most of my weekend this weekend ferrying my kids around various places rather than doing things that I want to do. I haven't been spending time with my wife and having lots of fun with her.
yeah,
I imagine there are couples out there who've been together for 34 years who are still having quite a bit more fun in classic terms going out together. But there is something almost kind of culturally slightly we view those couples as slightly almost a bit pathetic, right? If they're having too much fun
yeah,
after too much time, if they're the 60-year-olds getting drunk together, going to
yeah,
nightclubs, etc., we kind of expect the fun to shift by
yeah.
age and by experience and wisdom, maybe rather than anything to do with families. I'm not sure. I just wanted to challenge us a little bit and say, are we sure then they're not fun? I think they're fun around the edges. I think we can explore kind of over the next 20 minutes or so what we mean by that, because I think you're more of a skeptic about even that even the kind of margins of long-term relationships with families can feel
I'm
like
literally no fun, Graham. I would say it made me think of a parenting book which is called All Joy and No Fun. It's about those sort of early years of parenting,
like
and
that.
basic kind of idea of the book is that there are really like blissful moments of joy, the first smile, those moments of early infant care that really reward you. But it's not that much fun. It's actually really tiring, isn't it? It's worrying for lots of parents. They don't believe in the baby's natural resilience. They don't know what they're doing. They've got broken, interrupted sleep. They're not connecting in the same way. The woman's body has changed. They're very unlikely to have had sex at the kind of frequency they were having before, particularly if they were trying to make a baby, and that proved difficult. It's not really fun. But you wouldn't not do it. I mean, it's magical, huh?
Yeah, agreed. But I'm also thinking of those mini moments, or how would you describe mini moments of kind of flirtation in the kitchen, of sending each other nice texts during the day or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Kind of those many moments. I wouldn't call them joyful necessarily, but they're
Yeah.
kind of, you go for a nice meal together and you feel like you've
Yeah.
reconnected once every couple of weeks, once every month or so. They're genuinely fun, aren't they? Rather than really intense moments of joy, like when your kids kind of laugh
Yeah.
the first time.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess there's a reason, like some of the films and stories we tell about love stop before they start. Like it is an easier thing to describe and to relive and to find a story in those early moments of relationship joy and connection. It doesn't seem to film well. It doesn't seem to translate into a very good story, longer term relationships where you're maybe negotiating, compromising, and doing some hard work in those kind of early years of raising kids, for example.
I think that's right. Even films that gently tease at the complexities of long-term relationships, like the very last scene of The Graduate, for example, where they get on the
Yeah,
bus and they're kind of long, dramatic
yeah,
pause on Dustin Hoffman's face as if he's had the exciting moment, but then they're sitting at the back of the bus and he's kind of almost looking into the future and thinking, what
Yeah.
the bloody hell do we do now?
Yeah.
Almost they tease at it, but it's still a fundamentally romantic image.
Yeah.
We draw out in the blog post about the kind of counter cultural stories of what long-term relationships look like, and they generally involve constraint. They generally
Yeah.
involve unhappiness,
Yeah.
feeling constrained, feeling tied down. We draw on like Tony Soprano,
Yeah.
a few others. I've mentioned before on the podcast that the Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight trilogy, and I think that
Mm.
one of the interesting things about Before Midnight, when the couple in that trilogy are into their 40s with children, it's a really bloody good movie. It's a really
Yeah.
great movie exploring the complexities and the tensions in long-term relationships that we're talking about. So it is somewhat of a surprise that there aren't more great pieces
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
of art that explore that. There probably are in literature, but probably literature's
There are,
not.
I mean, there are a bit in literature, aren't there? But I mean, I've been thinking about this for the book that we're writing on the subject, and there aren't many. I mean, you and I like a bit of Updike and
Yeah.
that sort of genre of literature, but like grim,
No, I
some
don't look it up like for
for anything uplifting.
for nice stories of long-term relationships.
But
No.
I think there's a lot of that, a lot of that marriage is constraining and imprisoning and constricting and all of that stuff. And even the book we were talking about recently, the Miranda July book, really marriage there is something to be escaped from, and
Yeah.
you know,
Even if
not.
it's not obviously awful on the surface.
Yeah, it's just utterly boring, isn't it? Even though it's
Yeah.
quite nice, and he lets her, have time away while he's looking after the kid. They negotiate nicely, some back and forth. I think they are still having a sex life together, and
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like he's a ogre, and it doesn't sound like she's been a terrible wife, apart from the fact that she, rather than going on the business trip that she's purports to go on, she begins an affair with somebody else, which is probably not a great thing to be on the receiving end of, right? If you're that guy, but it's sort of the picture of the marriage, even though the marriage isn't awful, is the marriage is a bit awful or a bit boring or a bit constraining.
Yeah, and maybe that's one reason why this blog post kind of took uh, took flight a little bit and
Yeah, yeah,
got a little bit of
yeah,
interest is that we are pushing against the kind of cultural stories that people inhale, and maybe there's some appetite for a slightly different, more realistic version that probably is more in line with what people's real lives are like. You
yeah,
draw on a number of nice metaphors in the blog posts about what long-term relationships can offer, even if they're not, in our words, kind of no fun necessarily. So there's the idea that fine wine kind of matures
yeah, right, yeah,
through age, or kind of startup businesses, that there's a lot of energy and intensity at the beginning of a business, but over time you've got to get an accountant, you've got to get an HR department, you've got to do all the boring shit to before
yeah,
before you start to make profit. There's
yeah,
a lot there. Often the metaphors involve a little bit of effort as well.
yeah,
That
yeah,
you,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
learn an
They
instrument or
do.
learn a language, you get the benefits a bit further down the line.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thought you wouldn't like the wine one. I thought you'd think that was a bit too twee, the fine wine.
Well, it's
I've
very North London, isn't it? It's very North
not
London.
got you down as a fine wine kind of guy.
No, I'm more an
Bit
IPA
reverse
guy, aren't I?
snobbery there, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
Um, the startup one I quite liked because I work with so many guys who are in that world, and it's almost more fun at first. Like it's what a lot of people say about startup, that you want to get to a sort of, I don't know, there's a sweet spot, there's a certain size which doesn't actually net you huge amounts of money, but it's just joyous. It's you in charge, maybe with your mates or really like-minded people having a lovely time, not necessarily turning
yeah.
over an
Flying by the
absolute
seat of your
fortune.
pants a little bit.
Yeah, and by the time you grow it, and then you've got payroll, and then you've got HR problems, and then you've got an HR function which you've got to set up, and fund, and then you've got an HR function comes with HR problems, and all of that stuff, and that's like maybe less fun. The rewards are there maybe in terms of legacy in that instance, and scale and reach and stuff. It's a bit different, isn't it, from a relationship? But if you want to go after those things, there is some, I don't know, some pain to endure.
Yeah, yeah, and the effort point about kind of
Yeah,
tending to a garden, for example, tending
yeah,
to learning a musical instrument, that
yeah.
the metaphors don't quite work because there's not the intent
No,
front.
No.
that we're talking about that falling in love does. But I think they're nice ideas if you put the effort in up front, that you see the results potentially decades down.
Yeah.
You're building something that you're both enjoying. You're building something with depth. I think
Yeah.
it's a kind of key word that we keep coming
Yeah.
back to, that idea of depth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 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 yeah. And like just sort of switching it up a bit, it's we're talking about sports and just watching sports teams, isn't it? Would you want them to win all the time? Does that make you a fan? It feels like the people who, the boys in my boys' school who kind of picked up the most popular team 2 or 3 years ago, the winning team, it's kind of, it doesn't feel real, does it? It feels like we think of those as, plastic fans rather than like real fans. You want to be going through it a bit. You want some rough with the smooth. It's sort of like golf would be no point to it if you got a hole in one every time you went out for a round. It's meant to be challenging, right? The bit that I think is in the relationships that comes as like a kind of endless challenge to me is also good for me. It really is genuinely good for me, and I want it. I want to be challenged to be less selfish, less obsessed with my minor preferences. That
That's
does
interesting. That's not
does be
something that we
empowering.
necessarily kind of drew on in the article, that idea of
Yeah,
growth, personal growth,
yeah,
character growth to some
yeah.
through a relationship.
Also, just like let less. I mean, I go with that. I'm happy with that, but just not being an arsehole really is more what I mean. Like you live on your own and you do your own thing, and I'd be even more unbearable than I am at the moment. It's like it does me good. It softens me. It rounds me out. It gives me a different point of view and a perspective. Like just an example that I sometimes share with clients is if we've got something that needs transacting at the school, my impulse is to talk immediately in assertive terms to the head teacher because that's the person who marshals resources from my point of view. And I want to make a big impact and I want my point of view to be taken seriously from the get-go. My wife would come at it from there's a really experienced classroom teacher who knows the issue in detail and is going to be much closer to it. And that's where we begin the conversation. And that classroom teacher has 30 other children to look after. We've got repeat business with the school. We don't need to be going in with our, size 10s. And I think if you meld those two things together, maybe you get the best of both worlds, or you certainly get a challenge on me. You get a break to my kind of impulse to go and be very assertive in the first instance, where just a conversation that was a bit more curious and a bit more I don't know, respectful, thoughtful, would work just as well.
Yeah, and that probably over the years in your household involved a degree of conflict, right? And one of the
Yeah, for
things
sure.
that long-term relationships involved is conflict, is argument, is tension,
Yeah,
but that tension leads to, if it's worked through well, connection, intimacy,
yeah,
depth of
yeah,
relationship. You're exploring those differences through sometimes through tension
yeah.
and growing together in certain ways that really deepens that connection.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When I share that with clients because it seems to connect not just those who've got kids, but just as an example of where something is really important and is at stake. And there is a sort of somewhat binary way of doing those things. Is the first conversation with the head teacher at your insistence, or is the first conversation more low key and with the classroom teacher? So we're going to have to decide in the end one or the other, rather than endlessly kind of hedge it or fudge it. And what you get, I think, in a relationship which isn't functioning that well is an accusation from one party that the other one either doesn't care or isn't a sufficiently strong advocate for the children or for whatever the issue might be.
Yeah.
And the other one is a bloody hothead and will never, always looking for an argument rather than looking for a solution, actually is going to make the situation worse. And I think when you come at it like that, you're in all sorts of trouble, aren't you? In that instance, my wife and I are both thinking, when we're at our best, how do we resolve this in the interests of our children, for example? Like what would be the best, what would genuinely be the best way through it? What are we missing? What's missing from my thinking? Each of us
Mm.
have that kind of conversation, because it doesn't follow. I'm not meaning to suggest my wife is always right and that the first point of contact is with the classroom teacher. I don't hold that point of view, right? It's okay to challenge her on her preference for keeping it low key in that instance, right?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That's
It's the
you're
point of her being with someone like me, right?
Yeah, and I think in our couples where we find that quite regularly, where those differences are ultimately appreciated, and the couples where that goes wrong are often where the differences are
Yeah,
being pushed back against, as
yeah,
if, like you were saying earlier, the other person is wrong. That you're trying to persuade them that they're wrong. You're trying to persuade
yeah.
them that their way of seeing the world is wrong, and trying to haul them towards your worldview. That's
Yeah.
very unlikely to work in the vast majority of situations.
Well, I think it's a point you make a lot. I've heard you make it a number of times that you'll never persuade the other person that way. And really the game is like, can you see the world from their point of view? Can you see why that would make sense to them? It's not to agree with it or to necessarily, surrender your own point of view, but it's like, I can see why you'd come at it like that. So I can stop hating on you or getting really frustrated with you. I can, that can maybe shift something in me. And if I'm seeing it from your point of view and that's helpful to you, you might also return the favor. You might return the courtesy and be able to do the same for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are we missing as part of this conversation? If anything, I'm still worried we're going to leave listeners feeling like our view about long-term relationships is a bit gloomy.
Yeah. Yeah. I
What are we
think the
missing?
other comparison or example we had in there, metaphor, bit of imagery was investing, like
Compound interest, yeah.
not necessarily fancy investing in the market. Could just be deposits in a saving account, couldn't it? But it could be that more sort of profound idea of compound interest, which does remarkable things over time, that you're really making the thing deeper and richer and loads more meaningful. I would say I don't think I can find a way of describing that as fun in a way that stays meaningful for me, but it is to build on something, to really improve and increase something over time.
Is when I ask you if there's anything missing and like a way to invite excitement in our listeners, you bring us back to accounting. Wow, bring us back to
I,
money and accounting.
I
What?
think it's sort of
I'm not prepared. I think that's it. I think that's a lovely example. What?
riches and sort of wealth and kind of
But investing isn't
extravagance.
fun though, and I don't want to lose the idea that we're not saying that you don't need moments of fun, because I think relationships where there is no fun, where there is no flirting, where there's no kind of
Yeah,
going out dancing together occasionally, getting
yeah,
drunk
right,
together at
yeah,
weddings, like you've got
yeah,
got to do
yeah,
that from time to time.
yep,
And
yep.
I don't want to leave people thinking that we're all about the compound interest and not about the dancing at a wedding.
I suppose those things are the compound interest, aren't they? That we're still like that. That is a substantial deposit that we still actually can really be interested in one another's career progression or friendship circles or achievements at work, or can really like one another on a night out, can be really pleased to come back to the table that your partner's sitting at, not somebody else's table. There could still be ongoing physical attraction. I wouldn't deny any of those things. I think it's very different often from the start. And the thing that seems to trip people up is this relationship isn't like it was when we first
Yes,
met. And I'm like,
yes,
that's not a problem. That
yeah.
is just
It's
a
amazing how often
cycle.
I hear that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm taken aback almost every time I hear it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
Me too.
it's a very regular, common
Yeah.
cultural trope, isn't it? This
Yeah. It
relationship is
is. Yeah.
different than it was 10 years ago. I'm upset about that. Well,
Yeah.
what on earth were you expecting? Genuinely
Dating.
expecting?
Yeah. 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 So I think those things that you're describing, going out together, dancing together, maybe sort of cultural moments together, or just being in the company of friends
Yeah,
together.
drinking fine wine is what
Yeah, finding your partner funny, finding their stories like still entertaining,
yeah.
watching them, hold court a bit or show off a bit or be considerate to their friends or, step up when something's going on for them, whatever
Mm.
the example might be. I think those are really big deposits. And I think they do genuinely build wealth. We're thinking a little bit about Ezra Klein's book, weren't we, on abundance? Have I got
Yeah.
that right? Is it
Yeah.
abundance? It's a sort of abundance thing, isn't it? It's like the investing is not necessarily denying yourself something today for a deferred pleasure later. It is like you're going to build something so different. If you can be thoughtful and considerate, you can sometimes retire your preferences and bite your tongue. You're going to get something so substantial, so massively increased, substantial in size that you couldn't dream of at this moment in time. You're going to live a life together, and you're going to see a bunch of things together that just aren't possible if you, I don't know, insist on your way all the time and go for short-term gains.
Nice. Any final words before we sign off?
No, why don't you have the final word, Graham? You sum up better. You've usually got a little
I'm usually the romantic one
nice.
of us. I'm usually the less kind of gloomy one, but I'm going to bring us back to something a bit more scientific in that the data backs this up, right? The data backs up
Yeah,
this is the most important thing in people's lives. That if you invest in long-term relationships, even if they do lack a little bit of a punch,
yeah,
the years that it's going to make you feel like your life is more, it's going to give you more contentment in your life. It's going to make your life feel meaningful. It's going to make you feel better as a person. It's going to increase
yeah,
your self-esteem. And weirdly, married people with in the long term seem to live longer, but I think there's
yeah.
probably some self-selection bias going on there.
Yeah. You ruined the fun of that point.
I'm
That
always on the
is.
lookout for self-selection bias. It's there everywhere.
It's what do we say? I think that the final line of the blog post is something like, if you're really lucky, you find yourself reflecting back on the highs and lows of the relationship, recognizing there are both the things, and realizing that you'd probably choose your partner again. And we say that's not fun, that's a bloody miracle, right?
You gave me the last word, and then you've taken it.
I took it back. I didn't like your last word. It was no fun, and you know what I'm all about.
Good. Let's leave it there. See you next time.
Yeah, nice to see you, Graham. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.